It is a single-issue night here at the News Gang, just as it has been the case around the country for the last 3 nights. Terrorists struck us again, an attack on our freedoms once again. But we've been here before. Tonight, the similarities, the differences, the lessons learned, those we're yet to, the milestones and missteps, the hashtags, the anger, the triumph, the briefings, the lives lost, those saved, the pain of loss and the joy and relief, the war in a faraway land, the people in command, the first responders, the men and women behind the attack, the men and women relaying these events to you. Will we say never again and mean it this time? What is the gang's view on crisis communication and verdict on media coverage of the attack and its aftermath? All the people around this table tonight covered this attack, made crucial decisions on the coverage of it all, and have reported on many such attacks before. Tonight, we will discuss it all, including whether we made the right calls or not. Also on News Gang, terrorism's road to Damascus in reverse. How did Eric Kinyanjui become Ali Salim, or is it Farouk? That and much more. But first, how it all unfolded. And we want to begin with the man who was there from the minute the story broke, and that's Francis Gashuri. So, you were there. Tell us about what time you got there, what it was like. We'll get into the critique a little later on, but just from a journalist perspective of covering this attack from the minute we heard about it. A totally unexpected event. Yeah. Actually, let me step back. This is not your forte, we must mention.
And that's why I want to say what happened before it happened.
Right.
We were in an editorial team meeting at 3 p.m. and we got information that there was an attack around Chiromo Road.
A robbery.
Actually, the first information came that there was a bank robbery around that area. But there was a blast in the course of it. And so we felt if it is a bank robbery, it can be a blast. And so, spur of the moment, I said, let me go and check. So together with cameraman Willie Ogunga and Alex Obado, we dashed there. Actually, we used motorbikes and do this to get there. The officers that we found there initially told us they got the same information, that it was a bank robbery. But gradually, it became something else. And that's how we ended up there. Actually, we got there at about 5 minutes to 4. And the attack had happened at around 3 o'clock, 3:05, 3:30 or thereabout. Yeah. And so from there, we got rolling. Totally unexpected. I mean, it was a very unfamiliar territory for me. And that is why you do your best.
Under the circumstances.
Very tough, but it's also a delicate balancing act. I mean, so, guys are looking for information.
Yes.
You're also looking for the same. Things are happening. It's a live event. Quite a number of things can happen. Good things and bad things. But all in all, we did what we could.
Yeah. So good things and bad things. So tell us your frame of mind when you are out there. Who are you speaking to? Who's calling you? Who are you calling? What sort of instructions are you getting? How are you relaying this? And remember, a lot of this is live throughout. So just give us your frame of mind.
Unfortunately, everybody is calling you. Yeah. Everybody calls you. Yeah. From my bosses here, viewers are calling you. There are people who are inside the building who are also trying to call me. Others who are sending texts.
Friends.
My family members are also calling me. Yeah. I mean, you get all calls, and it's the same phone to the same person. Unfortunately, you have to ignore the calls that are coming from I had to ignore the calls that are coming from my family. Of course, they are worried about my safety. You're also getting instructions from I'm also getting instructions from my bosses. That is the same line I'm using to communicate with the studio. So it's very tough, but you have to make those decisions. You're also looking for that information and relaying the same information to our viewers who are in need of knowing exactly what is happening.
And you know, Yvonne, the first hour of any breaking news story is usually the most difficult because on the one hand, it's a big story, especially after you establish that it is a big story, but you don't have a lot of information, so you kind of have to stay on air and keep getting information from different sources and keep building it as you go along. And this was interesting, actually, because when it happened and we were here calling Gashuri and other people. And it was interesting because someone like Wahiga Maora, who had been there doing other things, and he was actually about to leave. So he had to jump into the studio, didn't have a jacket, had to get from somewhere else and that sort of thing. And then I think he had some close relative family who was around that building. So he's also concerned about that person and that sort of thing. But the idea was that at that point, decision making is critical. It is completely you could say uncomfortable, in the sense that on the one hand you have to keep people informed, you don't want to give the wrong information, and you have to give information fast because people really want to know what's happening. So as a journalist, at that very moment you're dealing with very many different issues at the same time. You don't want to cause panic, you want to inform people
as factually as possible. So what time did the police get there? What's the response like? What is that that you are seeing? So tell us about that. Who was there? Who was first on the scene?
When I got there, I found police officers, actually from the flying squad team, because they had also come to respond to what they got as a bank robbery around that area. So it was the first team that that landed there was a contingent of the flying squad. And you must give credit to our officers. This time, they were extremely meticulous and organized. I found there Chief Inspector Njoroge, he's the head of operations flying squad. He's the first guy that I spoke to, and he told me this is a terror attack, so you guys must also be very careful. You must also relay the information that is relevant. Don't cause alarm. I mean, and stay calm and follow instructions from the security officers who are around there. Remember, at the same time, there was a vehicle that the attackers had used to get to the venue. And that vehicle was laced with grenades and other explosives. Actually, some of them were exploded today around that area. So you can imagine that situation. And unfortunately, I had gotten there without the protective gear, because the first reaction was that of, you guys rush there, get information as other things unfold. The kit was coming when we were already on air, and there was crazy traffic. So you can imagine even the people who were trying to bring the kit to us were already in that panic. I mean, the road had been closed. So you can imagine the struggle.
So take us back to sort of the deployment. So you first find, and then the reinforcements, who's coming in, you know, what's happening, what's that command looking like?
I could see the Chief Inspector Njoroge trying to make calls and, you know, using their radio call, that walkie-talkie thing, calling for reinforcement. More and more officers were arriving, but luckily every officer who was coming, every team that was coming, that was being deployed to him and reporting to him, and he was able to deploy quite a number of guys. At that time, we were going closer and closer to the scene of attack. Unfortunately, at that point, what rings in your mind is, where are these attackers? Probably they are positioned at a vantage area where they could fire at everybody. So it was very tricky. But luckily, even the officers who were there, they were very calm, and they were able to even tell us, okay, you guys don't go this direction, don't go this direction, go this direction. Even themselves, because they were also responding to those attacks. At the same time, you could hear screams, guys who were asking for help and so on and so forth. So the idea was not necessarily to combat with the attackers, but to try and save as many lives as possible. And that is where a lot of the whole difference was made.
That's an interesting mindset. Yeah, Janet.
Yes, I remember something that Francis and Joe also alluded to. I remember we were also in the gallery when it happened, and the issues about information, trying to make sure that you tell people what's going on, because I think when something like that happens, and because of social media, of course, people on Twitter, on Facebook, but they also switch on their televisions because they want to know what's going on. And we needed information. And I remember we kept also going through the Twitter handle for the police, for the DCI, try and get information. Is this really a terrorist attack? I think it took a bit of time for us to actually say this is a terrorist attack, because we had to confirm that it was.
I think we kept saying it was a coordinated
attack. So by the time we were saying it was a terrorist attack was when we got the first statement from the police, for the National Police on their Twitter. That was at around 4:39 p.m. that this is actually what's going on. It was very brief, but they said that there's an attack going on and it's keep off the area. And then they were giving subsequent frequent updates. I think the next one was an hour later. And then finally, at around some minutes past 5, we had the first statement from the IG, Bonet, saying that yes, an attack had happened and all that.
And I want to just pause, because we'll come back to how this series of events and information that was flowing out was being communicated. Linus, what would you say about this response? by the authorities. If you compare that with what happened at Westgate, what happened at Garissa, there's Kampala, there's quite a number of them, yeah.
I think there's a temptation by everyone to compare this with 2013 and I think 2015 we had Garissa as well. But I think we should remind, and Kenya should be reminded, that we are actually on our 20th year of terrorism, actually 21st, because the first attack was in 1998, 7th of August. And I think it'll be fair to actually look at all the responses and how far the country has come in handling this issue of terrorism. I remember in 1998, I was reporting, I was on assignment at what was then the KCCT Mbagathi College, the Kenya College of Communications Technology. There was an economic conference called by President Daniel Arap Moi. And on this particular day, it was Mwai Kibaki, who was then the opposition chief, who was addressing. He was at the podium at the time when the news came through that something has happened in the Central Business District. And somebody, I remember it was his bodyguard, whispered something to him, and he called off the meeting and he said, ladies and gentlemen, and you remember his booming voice, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some business to attend to. Something serious has happened in Nairobi, so we all have to go there. What I remember is we all left, the politicians, and the movement was very, very easy because all vehicles left at the same time. In no time, in about 20 minutes, we were outside the cooperative building where the bomb attack had occurred. Now, why I'm bringing this event is because of how much has changed. I remember that particular day, everyone seemed to know very little in terms of how to respond. Nobody knew what this is all about. We in the media too at the time were grappling with the whole thing. That is the first time we were hearing of Osama bin Laden. That was the first time that his name came about. That was the first time Al-Qaeda came to place. But I remember the chaos that was passing as the response. The police, KDF already there, the Red Cross, it was a lot of chaos. There was no coordination basically. President Daniel Arap Moi came and addressed Kenyans right there at the steps of the rubble. What I remember was disorder. Now, coming to day before yesterday, Tuesday, what we are seeing is increasingly we are becoming a country that knows what to do when there is a terrorist attack. Look at the earliest footage by the first responders, the police, the regular police, and I think AP. These are security people who normally do their general patrols. They were the first responders there. And I remember among the first clips, I think in one of the clips by John Allen Namu, you saw that the police were saying, "Hii ni terror." They know what this is. To go back 21 years ago, the first responders did not know what this is all about. A building is down, there's a lot of blood, there's death all over the place. A lot has changed. And Kenyans for a long time will be talking about the response of Tuesday, which in many, many ways was very, very impressive. Compared to 2013, compared to Westgate, for example, chain of command was there. We didn't have KDF versus the elite Reke squad from the GSU. We had coordination. There was a central point of reference. And again, that point of reference was not visible to all the Kenyans. I think it's to a few.
Actually, I remember, unlike what we saw at Westgate, where top police officers, top KDF officers came and kind of disorganized the whole operation. This time, even the very senior police officers who came there, they let the commanders of the operation take charge. For example, very few people know that the person who was in charge of the operation is GSU Commandant Douglas Kanja, together with Musa Yego, the head of Flying Squad, and actually Chief Inspector Njoroge, head of operations, Flying Squad. Those are the guys who are taking charge of the operation. I saw there the Deputy Inspector General of Police, Edward Mbogwa, but you never saw him issue commands to anybody. CID Director George Kinoti was also around there, and they were actually offering that backup support in terms of, but the lead, in terms of who took the lead, was those three officers in terms of coordination. There were KDF officers who came there, but
the special forces.
The special forces. Yeah. But you never saw the chief of defense forces coming there like we saw
in 2013.
At Westgate.
Yes.
And in terms of deployment, you could clearly see there was a methodical and tactical approach to that attack.
Yeah, just very quickly, because when we're talking, just a second, you said when the others would come in, they would speak to Njoroge first, and then they would brief
effectively.
Just tell us about that. Yeah.
Actually, so when the officers were coming, Njoroge was the first point of reference.
Yeah.
They were coming to him, and he was directing them accordingly to where to go. And like what you saw at Westgate, where officers. Even all the officers.
Yeah.
And like what you saw at Westgate, where officers were moving from one corner to another in a very uncoordinated manner. This time they were being deployed effectively and specifically. There were even officers who had taken cover around the river. Pictures that many people didn't see. There were others who are deployed in various other places that you cannot mention for obvious reasons. But in terms of coordination, give it to our officers. This time they did a superb job.
Yes, I think that the two terror attacks of 2013 and 2014, that's Westgate and Garissa, had a 2015 rather had a significant impact on how we deal with these things, because those tough wars were so glaring at Westgate, where there were even reports that some people shot at each other, KDF and police and that sort of thing, and that everybody was getting in everybody's way because people wanted to steal the show, and so that at the end of the day you say, yeah, we did it, and that sort of thing actually was glaring. A lot of people saw it. So after that there was a review, and it was felt that it is important to have that multi-agency coordination, central command when something like that happens, and even communication. I know we'll talk about that later on in the show, but that was actually one of those things that you can't have everybody speaking all over the place. I also have it on good authority that this time around, there weren't too many calls coming from above, you know how they usually say. And that gave the people on the ground space and time to do what they needed to do, because the moment, for example, there are calls coming from whether it is State House or whatever other place, then it means that everybody starts to panic, and then whether it is the CDF or the Inspector General then now gets involved directly because there are calls coming from above, and then everything basically goes into panic mode. But this time, apparently there was less of that, and so the people at dusit were just left to do their thing the best way they know how.
And let's just give context to remind people just how much we have changed from 2013 and 2015. Garissa, if you remember, what we know is that the GSU had the alarm at about 6 o'clock in the morning that something was happening. They had to wait 7 hours to get a plane to take them to Garissa. Meanwhile, you had the CS, who were getting there much earlier.
To do what?
Exactly.
Yes. And then the core team lands at 1:56 p.m. and then they take another 2 hours to get briefed before they can actually now begin to deploy into the university. By this time, scores of people had been killed. Now, if you also compare that with 2013, and this was actually a very interesting moment in Uhuru Kenyatta's presidency. It was 2013, he'd just taken over, it was barely a year, and many say they learned the lessons then about how to deploy the military, and that maybe the military should have been used in a different format, which was to secure the perimeter area while allowing, the sort of special units and the recce company to actually go in. And so even then, that's what you're saying
actually,
about the difference in the deployment of military.
In the course of this operation, an officer I was talking to was telling me, dealing with a terror attack, especially in a confined area, like what we saw at the 14 Riverside office block, you require very tactical officers. It's like a surgery. An axe and a scalpel.
Yes.
All of them are useful equipment. However, you cannot perform a surgery with an axe.
That's right.
And you cannot cut a tree with a scalpel. So it is effective deployment. If it is such an operation in a closed door I mean, in a closed area like that one, you require officers who are very well trained in such.
Especially hostage situations.
Absolutely.
Which is why in this case, the military wasn't necessarily the ones that were dealing with the sort of, hostage crisis.
Imagine a situation where the officers who responded first were going to engage the attackers in a shootout. I mean, you're going to lose very many people who ordinarily would have been saved. And that, I think, is also a lesson that was learned. We all hear stories about Westgate where how there was a lot of shooting, and actually a good number of people lost their lives unnecessarily so because of the use of brute force. This time, the gunshots were very specific. You would hear gunshots and then you see a group of guys being evacuated. Then you hear some more gunshots and a group of people being evacuated. Actually, the continuous shooting, we had it very early in the morning, around 5, between 5 and let's say between 4:30 and about 5:30 is when now we had consistent shooting, and that's the time we were being told that the attackers were being neutralized. As at that point, nearly all the floors around that office park had been secured, so to say.
And Yvonne, just on the same, I'm sorry, okay. We got reports that afterwards that over 700 people were evacuated from the complex. And many of them, I think, were evacuated around 3:40, 4 a.m. in the morning. And throughout the night, people, would text and send messages and say, my relatives in there, how are they? And a lot of these people were actually in their offices, huddled down, waiting to be rescued. And every time when we watch during the day and we see all these people coming out, we even had, other than the police forces, we had these security people who are licensed gun holders. One of them is the gentleman called Inayat, who I think is splashed all over all the newspapers trying to help people come out. And I think that coordination that you're talking about is what has help all those people come out. You talk about being told that complex would have been so difficult to get people out. But when you hear people stayed in there till 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to be rescued, it means that the officers must have been doing their jobs properly. There must have been a lot of coordination for these people to be able to survive that.
You see, one other observation that should really be made about this incident is the way the 14 Riverside office park is. I think of all the terror venues since 1998, this should have been the most difficult to handle.
Absolutely.
Because of the nature of the place. First of all, there's only one entrance. It's the same one that they still have to use as an exit. And you could see what the terrorists were doing was to make it impossible for anybody to use that exit, because it's the same one. The place has a high wall, complete with an electricity fence. So it's not a place that you can jump. So this was very, very difficult for security personnel to navigate. And the fact that they managed to contain it within 17 hours. Let's remember Westgate took how many days?
80 hours.
About 4 days.
80 hours, yeah.
Yeah, 4 days. This we've reduced to 17 hours. And also the number of casualties. The shorter the time it takes to actually intervene, the higher the likelihood of keeping the casualties down. And I think that's what happened, and this is really commendable.
But all that said, I think there are still things that one could not fail to notice that we could probably do better. I mean, I think that there was still, one could still see there were a lot of busybodies around there. And this mainly members of the public, but from some people I speak to in the security circles, actually even some people from the security sector who didn't need to be there, but somehow just hanging around there, being part of the action. So there was that bit of too many people that perhaps shouldn't have been there. But there was also I saw, and this generated a lot of conversation online, certain people who arrived there with rifles and they're in sleepers and that sort of thing. Like the guy who was the Uzi rifle, which is apparently an assault rifle that some people say shouldn't be hanging around with individuals. But so you see those kinds of things cause confusion. There was the issue, for example, of that lawyer who apparently was mistaken for one of the terrorists. I think because he had some band around his waist and that sort of thing. So there's a way that some people appeared there that may have caused some confusion. I also think there was too much traffic around their vehicles. There were many vehicles that perhaps shouldn't have been there, and it was very difficult even for the ambulances that were getting in and out to move there. And sometimes certain people can actually lose their lives because they lose time along the way just because of that. So how we handle that scene, and the other one I think which perhaps will come later on, but struck me, is how there was all this story about, oh, you know, that vehicle was here for I don't know how many minutes and that sort of thing. So there is just that thing about us that we don't seem to think critically. We don't seem to have that eye that says, hey, wait a minute, what is this guy doing here? He's been standing here, he's been doing that sort of thing. So I think from that response from the public that there's something unusual, I think we all just seem not to care about something even that
And Joe, you raise a very pertinent point, because that day I saw members of the public taking photos and selfies. And the security officers were trying to tell them, you guys get out of here, because you're even putting your lives in danger.
How do you be taking a selfie and there is an operation going on? I don't get it.
If those attackers had made their way there, how sure were we that they had there were no snipers in the buildings around there? And you also raise another valid point. I mean, Linus, the closed kind of a situation that area is. There are buildings all over, flats, and so if those guys could access such a highly guarded hotel, it means they could also have accessed flats around there, and they could have been up there. And you can imagine you're down there taking selfies and taking pictures of what is happening, and they could have easily shot many people. Also, I realized that Chiromo Road was not closed as quickly as possible. You could see taxis and other vehicles still using the same road, yet it is just adjacent to where the attack was happening. Ordinarily, I would have expected that as soon as the information was that this is a terror attack, all the roads leading to that direction should have been closed, except for very essential vehicles and essential personality. And also, get rid of everybody who has no business being around there. But now, the concentration for the officers was to try and save those who are coming from the building, while these other guys who are milling around were also putting their lives at risk.
And I hasten to add, while we are congratulating the forces for a better response, and there seemed to be an SOP to this one, there is still, and even as investigations continue, we must still talk about the role of intelligence. Could we have foreseen this? Could we have foiled it? Because yes, 21 is less than 147, is less than
67 at Westgate.
At Westgate, and the hundreds more in 1998. 21 is still too many. It's still
not just a number.
It's not just a number. And these were indeed. And if you talk about, you are doing the stories on the investigations, these guys cased the joint. They had been there several times. I mean, I think we also need to just tighten up our information and intelligence gathering. There was the man, who was selling Tumba clothing there, who said,
and he said he had seen that car several times.
Lots of things, of course, including people who said that the lady from Gashuri's neighborhood, who that actually had posted some things on Facebook for several months.
She calls herself an Al-Shabaab bride.
Yes, she did that on her Facebook. But anyway, for many Kenyans, talk of communication in times of crisis here at home naturally brings back memories of Westgate and that now infamous statement on burning mattresses. But on Tuesday all the way to yesterday, the government appeared to have learnt a few lessons, or had it. The communication seemed more deliberate and came from specific offices, and the content was minimalist and no questions were allowed. Here's part of what the Inspector General said after he had confirmed the dusit attack.
Owing to the swift and targeted response by our security agencies, the situation has been largely contained, and 6 out of the 7 floors of the hotel building has been secured.
Now, that statement actually came much later on, at almost 10 o'clock, but the first statement had come at about 5 p.m., and that statement was very short, that simply said that the government regretted that a group of assailants attacked the dusit complex in what was called a suspected terror attack, and you could see that that statement was completely guarded. It didn't give too many details. Ladies and gentlemen, quite different from what we saw the last time, where everybody was falling over themselves
And
to
people
say
were
something
whispering in each other's ears.
about what had happened at
Mattresses were burning.
Yes, Jamila.
Yes, I remember that statement, and I don't think people will forget about the burning mattresses very soon. And you spoke about, I mentioned this before, that when we started covering the story after it broke, and Gashuri and the rest of the team were on location, we couldn't really say it was a terrorist attack until we got that confirmation from the IG. But I think also we need to congratulate how it has been done this time. And you've mentioned that it wasn't an alarmist. The statements were straight to the point, very short, and they were not allowing questions. And as the first statement on the attack was actually on Twitter before the Boynet was on air, Inspector General. It was at 4:39 p.m. and it said yes, there's an attack, and it was short but to the point. And subsequently after that, there were regular updates about what was going on. And of course, now we had the IG speaking, and then we had a second briefing. That is the one that you aired, and that was at around 9 p.m. And he gave a bit more information about it, saying 6 of the 7 floors had been cleared. And then we had the Minister, Matiang'i, giving a press briefing at 11 p.m.
Actually, let's listen to the CS just now, and then we can go on.
I can now report that we have secured all the buildings that had been affected by these events. The security teams have evacuated scores of Kenyans and other nationalities from the buildings.
It was again straight, short, to the point, no questions, and that was it.
Exactly, and I was quite intrigued actually by the content of this, because quite frankly, there wasn't much that was said, but there was this sort of from a lot of people that I spoke to, reassurance around that the government is saying no one seems to be panicking, everything is in under control, and that sort of thing. And that seems to be something that we learned from the past, Yvonne. It was quite chaotic the last time, because I remember the CDF at the time, General Karangi is trying to say something, David Kimayo trying to say something,
Olelenku
talking about his mattresses, and then maybe he doesn't get it right, and someone next to him will whisper something, and so it was really chaotic. But this time around, it wasn't just about the regular communication, but even the content seemed to be quite guarded.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, and you remember we did the night coverage of Westgate for all the 4 days, and it was just, I remember my reaction just coming back from, what? Mattresses? I mean, if you recall, you were actually my producer that night, and it was hard to believe. I remember coming back and saying, so how do we say this with a straight face? What is this that's being said? Also the whispering,
amongst
from one
the
person
officials,
to another, and the cabinet secretary at the time did not look at all confident. But here was what was lacking, and I think a lot of people noticed that from the content of the communication. We're hardly being given numbers and figures and statistics, and you notice this time they sort of tried to keep that information. Even Cabinet Secretary Matiang'i, when he came in, didn't say X number injured, X number died. Neither did the president, by the way, when he made the statement the following day. We've lost X number of...
He didn't even talk about the number of attackers.
Of attackers, yes. All the attackers had been...
Could be 2, 6,
absolutely.
7.
And when pressed, Minister Matiang'i refused to give us those numbers. I remember you were at the scene, and journalists were pressing him and telling him, so how many attackers?
But Kaikai, you've covered quite a number of these things over the years. There's usually something about numbers in situations like this.
Right, absolutely. What we saw this time is a government that was keen, very careful, not to burn its fingers in the same way it did in 2013. In 2013, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, the Westgate attack.
Yeah.
Because the communication was very chaotic. And they seem to have followed a very simple communication rule. Don't say anything unless you're sure what you're talking about. And they also, I think, going forward, will learn from their own handling of this particular communication. The 2 statements by the IG and 1 statement from Matiang'i, none of them contained a lot. But still, it was very, very necessary to step out there and tell the public something, that you're doing something, and you give them an update. Of course, they'll need encouragement going forward to step out a bit more. Because what we've noticed in times of crisis is this instinctive inclination by government to conceal information. That should be reversed. It should be about step out and say, something is going on in 14 Riverside. Our security services are trying to figure out what that is. Keep off that area, say something. That's the rule of good communication. And I think we are starting to see an improvement. It's a vast improvement from the chaos of 2013. And I think the other rule that they followed was exactly the same one they did with the operations. Who is in charge? Not everyone was talking this time. It was, first of all, the police. And that's the first line of communication. Correctly, we should have had, and we did hear from the IG as the first line. And then the second line came later on, and that is the CS Interior. Final line, the president, coming the next day, many hours later, after consuming a lot of information, after being sure exactly what went on. But I want to say something about...
and the president's actually statement was very conclusive. So you can hold on to that thought so that we can get the president's...
The security operation at Dusit complex is over and all the terrorists eliminated.
So he's coming basically to just tell you, what that thing that's been going on since yesterday,
it's over. And I want to talk about the body language. Starting with the pitch of that speech. His tone was low. And you know very well that the president's tone occasionally, look at his addresses to parliament, it's usually raised. Or any national event, the voice is up there, the pitch is high. This one was toned down. Look at Machangi's statement the previous night, also delivered in a low, measured tone. What we saw here was a very good communication skill in terms of conveying confidence that some little misbehaving brats somewhere there, but we are taking care of them. It's very important to look assuring, to sound assuring, and I think they did well. And even IG did very well.
The one thing that is not acceptable, I've seen him in a while.
It did. The only one thing that is really unacceptable about all the three statements is when they don't take questions.
Yes.
But I would understand why probably they wouldn't want to take questions, because it is maybe their responses to some of these questions that triggers anxieties and actually invites contradictions. You remember at the Westgate scenario where questions were flying all over and the then CS clearly would not be able to handle questions. It is as a result of his handling of the questions that a lot of confusion was seen. And you can imagine there are people whose relatives are right inside that scene of attack. So if you give a contradicting statement, or if you don't look sure about what you're saying, you can imagine what it means to the viewer out there
what you don't say.
But I disagree. I disagree.
I disagree too. Yeah. And to the point of anxiety and all that, the only reason the government was really avoiding questions was because of two things. One, do you want to talk about the numbers now? And every journalist, the first thing they'll ask is
the numbers.
How many people are in there?
Yes.
How many have been killed?
Rescued?
How many have been taken to hospital? How many have been rescued? They didn't want to venture that way. And you want to also observe that this time, even the Red Cross, which has traditionally been an alternative source of statistics, figures, and things like that.
Quiet.
This time they were telling you, no, the figures will come from the government.
Yes.
So I think that was the biggest worry, because no government would want to say, for example, we had 1,500 people there, we can't account for 500. It's not a good statement.
But at the same time, actually you're coming to my point. If you ask IG at 5 p.m., how many people were in that building? How many attackers are therein? That is information probably he would not want to give you, because it may end up being contradictory. Imagine if he said there were 300 people in that complex, and then it ends up being
he doesn't have to comment.
He doesn't have to.
He doesn't have to answer.
There's an old answer, Joe. There's an old answer that says we can't comment on that
Yes.
at
No.
this
At
this
stage.
point,
Exactly.
We don't have that information
Yes.
at this
Right
stage.
now.
But there just
You
seems
can
to be
have
a
a
sense
press
of openness.
conference
Yeah.
Where that
in
is
which
the
you
answer
answer
to
all the
all of those
questions.
questions.
Right.
With
And
no
you-
answer.
Exactly.
No,
Yes.
that's an answer.
Yes.
If you don't have an answer, say it to Kenyans. No, we don't have that answer at this point. We are working on that.
Or
Yeah.
we are not willing to reveal those numbers at this point
At this
because
stage.
it is sensitive. But I think it also creates a sense of openness and accountability and reassuring as well.
And
Because when
talking
you
to-
come in and it's short and no questions and you go, we all ask, what else?
There's something you're hiding.
Yeah.
But there's something I think that is important, because I remember sometime in the night, our reporter Stephen Leto was somewhere on Chiromo Road and found a bunch of people waiting there. They had been stopped because, of course, there was like a roadblock there. But there were people who were concerned about the kin that
Were in
they
there.
thought
Yes.
were in there, and they didn't have any information at all. So the whole thing of giving information, I know there was the primary thing of trying to save people, but I think for families, usually they want to know what is going on, and probably they're not near TV or something or whatever. So I think that just that whole thing of going the extra mile to make sure that even for the families there's information very quickly where they can get information, because that is usually the first thing that they do, even out there, where you set up, whether it's a number or whatever, right away, that if you want to find out about your relative or whoever it is, this is how to call this number or go to this place or whatever it is. I think that was missing for a very, very long time. In fact, there was a number that was circulating that turned out to be fake. And people were circulating those things because there wasn't any
and there were
legitimate...
some people that called that
number,
were
it was
actually inside.
Yes,
that,
yes.
that I know.
And there's something I think maybe you talked about information, but they did a better job the next day at Chiromo, at Chiromo Funeral Home. There was a desk that had been set up that was being manned by Red Cross volunteers, and they were actually answering questions and trying to help.
No, that was very good.
Yeah, that was very good, and there was counselors there to actually take the families through before they went in to view the bodies and all after they came out. I think that is something that we need to actually commend.
Ordinarily, I think this goes to show how delicate such a process is. Imagine people are asking questions that probably you have no answers to, because this was not a defined kind of a situation where you can say this is exactly what is happening. In fact, even some of the offices and some of the the institutions that have offices there, you had no way of asking how many people do you have in your office so that you can be able to account for them. So while it is this hunger for information, I think it's also necessary to give right information that will not backfire the following day or 2 days later, where people will say we were lied to or something of the sort. But all in all, I think the most important thing, as Elena says, is constantly keep informing people on what is happening. I realized that at some point there were dead moments, because you can imagine at one point now we were pushed to about 300 meters from the actual scene of that.
We saw that
incident.
happening sometime after.
So you can imagine you don't know exactly what is happening inside there, and you also don't want to say anything that you're not sure about. Maybe this is where the government could have come in handy, not necessarily through press conferences, but even through Twitter, such statements. I mean, assure people like a minute, let's say every 20, 30, 40 minutes, tell guys, this is where we are, this is what we are doing, even without necessarily giving too much information, but that is reassuring to a great extent that something is happening.
Okay. Right, and talking of things happening, media coverage is always a point of great interest during tragedies such as witnessed at 14 Riverside on Tuesday. When terrorists hit the Westgate Mall in 2013, the media coverage of the attack drew sharp criticism, from live coverage by television to choices of photos by newspapers. Little seemed to please many Kenyans about the media coverage. Not the case this time. Let's see, what did we do different? Joe?